My name is Grace Carter, and at 32 years old, I thought the hardest day of my life would be attending my grandfather's will reading. I was wrong, because on that morning, just before I got into my car, a homeless man approached me and said 4 words that changed everything. "Don't drive that car." At first, I thought he was confused. Then I noticed where he was pointing. A dark liquid was spreading beneath my vehicle, brake fluid. I crouched down, looked underneath, and instantly realized something was terribly wrong. Someone hadn't damaged my car by accident. Someone had cut the brake lines, deliberately. But the sabotage wasn't what haunted me afterward. The part I still think about is what happened 2 days later. Because when I walked into my grandfather's attorney's office very much alive, my mother didn't cry with relief. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask if I was okay. Instead, she looked terrified, as if seeing me alive was the worst thing that could have happened. And eventually I learned why. Because she was involved. All of it. The theft, the lies, and the attempt on my life. To understand how everything reached that point, you need to know about my family. Or more accurately, the people who never truly considered me family. I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, not because I was born there, because I was placed there. When I was 6 years old, my biological parents died in a house fire. Most memories from that time are blurry, but I remember the smell of smoke, and I remember carrying my belongings in a black trash bag while social workers moved me from place to place. A year later, the Callahan family adopted me. Victor and Brenda Callahan. They already had a son named Derek. To everyone outside the home, they looked generous. Church-going people, respectable, kind. But appearances can be incredibly deceptive. They gave me a room, food, a roof over my head, yet somehow always made sure I knew I wasn't truly one of them. Family photographs never included me. Holiday traditions somehow happened around me instead of with me. Birthdays felt more like obligations than celebrations. For years, I convinced myself I was imagining it. Then my grandfather proved I wasn't. Walter Callahan, Victor's father, the only person in that family who treated me like I belonged. Walter owned an auto repair business for decades. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't flashy. But he believed in honesty more than anything else. When I was little, he'd let me sit beside him in the garage while he worked. As I got older, he taught me about engines, tools, and eventually something much more important. "People tell you who they are," he'd say. "The mistake is refusing to believe them." At the time, I thought he was talking about strangers. Years later, I realized he was talking about family. Walter encouraged me when nobody else did. When I wanted to study cybersecurity, he supported me. When I earned certifications, he celebrated. When I moved into my own apartment at 22, he helped me carry boxes. Not because he had to, because he cared. As his health declined, our roles slowly reversed. I helped organize his medical appointments, managed online accounts, handled paperwork, made sure his finances stayed in order. Eventually, he trusted me enough to give me legal authority to assist him, a responsibility I took seriously. The week before he died, he handed me an old silver pocket watch. It had belonged to him for decades. "Keep it wound," he told me. "It stops when you forget." Those were among the last meaningful words he ever said to me. 17 days later, he was gone. And suddenly the family that barely acknowledged me started paying very close attention to the upcoming will reading, because everyone expected money, and everyone expected conflict, especially Brenda, the woman who spent 25 years reminding me I wasn't truly one of them. At Walter's funeral, she cornered me in a hallway after the service ended. No witnesses, no smiles, just cold eyes and a colder voice. "You aren't family," she said quietly. "You never were." Then she leaned closer. "So don't expect anything from the will." I stared at her for several seconds, said nothing, then walked away. But that conversation stayed with me. Not because it hurt, because it felt like a warning. And the next morning, while reviewing Walter's financial records one final time, I discovered something that made that warning far more dangerous than I realized. Something hidden inside years of bank transactions. A pattern, a trail, and nearly $250,000 that had vanished. I didn't find the missing money by accident. Cybersecurity teaches you something most people never learn. Fraud leaves patterns. People think theft is hidden inside complexity. Usually it's hidden inside repetition. Late that night, sitting alone in my apartment with a cold cup of coffee beside me, I started reviewing Walter's financial records one last time before probate began. At first, everything looked normal. Utility payments, insurance withdrawals, medical expenses, the ordinary rhythm of a retired man's finances. Then I noticed something strange. Every 2 weeks, almost like clockwork, money disappeared from Walter's primary checking account. Not once, not twice, repeatedly. Same transfer route, same destination, same receiving account. The amounts varied. Sometimes $3,000, sometimes $5,000, occasionally more, but the pattern never changed. I opened a spreadsheet and started tracking them. One transfer became 10, 10 became 30, 30 became 78. My stomach tightened. When I totaled everything, the number staring back at me was impossible to ignore. $247,000, nearly $250,000. Gone. Transferred over 3 years. And every payment led back to a single account. An account registered under the name B. Parker. That name meant nothing to most people. It meant something to me, because Brenda's maiden name was Parker. I stared at the screen, then checked again, and again. Same result. The transfers had started shortly after Walter gave Brenda access to help with household bills. The timing wasn't coincidence. I knew exactly what I was looking at, but I wasn't ready to act. Not yet. A few weeks earlier, I had noticed the same pattern. I had already begun documenting it. Screenshots, transaction histories, account records, everything stored securely. If I accused someone of stealing from Walter, I wanted proof, not suspicions. Proof. The problem was timing. Walter was dying. Hospice nurses came daily. Every conversation felt precious. The last thing I wanted was a family war around his hospital bed. So I waited, and kept collecting evidence. Now Walter was gone, and the evidence had become overwhelming. I created a secure file, started organizing every transfer, every date, every destination, every account. The deeper I dug, the worse it looked. The money wasn't sitting untouched. It was being spent, moved, distributed, used. Someone wasn't safeguarding Walter's finances. Someone was draining them. By midnight, I had documented dozens of transactions. By 1 a.m, I had enough evidence to trigger a criminal investigation. By 2 a.m, I realized something else. If Brenda had stolen this much money while Walter was alive, she would do almost anything to stop the truth from coming out afterward. I should have realized how far she was willing to go. But I didn't. At 7:30 the next morning, I grabbed my coffee, picked up my keys, and headed toward my car. The will reading was scheduled for 10. The sky was clear, the air was cool. Everything seemed normal. Until a voice stopped me. "Miss Carter?" I turned. A man stood near the edge of the parking lot. Gray beard, old army jacket, weathered face, but alert eyes. Very alert eyes. Not the eyes of someone asking for money. The eyes of someone carrying information. "Don't drive that car," he said. I frowned. "What?" He took a cautious step forward. "Please, look underneath first." Something in his tone made me listen. No panic, no drama, just certainty. I walked around the front bumper, knelt, and immediately saw the dark puddle spreading across the pavement. Brake fluid, fresh, still dripping. My pulse accelerated. I lowered myself farther and looked beneath the vehicle. The cut was obvious. Clean, precise, deliberate. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. I stood slowly. The stranger nodded as if he'd expected that reaction. "My name's Frank Dawson," he said. "I worked for Walter for over 20 years. That got my attention. Frank explained that he had been Walter's head mechanic years ago. After retirement, life had fallen apart. Medical debt, Job loss, bad luck. Recently, he'd been sleeping in his truck behind a nearby commercial lot. The night before, around 2 in the morning, he'd seen a black pickup pull into my apartment complex. He watched a man crawl underneath my vehicle carrying tools and a flashlight. The truck looked familiar, very familiar, because it belonged to Derek, my brother, or at least the man who legally carried that title. The world suddenly felt very quiet. I wasn't shocked, not completely. Deep down, some part of me already knew. The missing money, Brenda's warning at the funeral, the timing of the will, now the sabotaged brakes. The pieces were beginning to fit together, and the picture they formed was terrifying. Frank looked at me carefully. "What are you going to do?" Most people would have called the police immediately. Most people would have filed a report. Most people would have reacted emotionally. Instead, I pulled out my phone, because I already knew exactly who I needed to call. A private investigator named Nolan Pierce. And within the next 20 minutes, the plan that would expose my entire family began to take shape. Nolan Pierce answered on the second ring. He had spent years investigating corporate fraud, insurance scams, and financial crimes. We had worked together before, and I trusted two things about him. He never rushed, and he never ignored evidence. I explained everything: the stolen money, the suspicious transactions, the warning from Frank, the brake lines, the will reading. When I finished, there was silence for several seconds. Then Nolan asked a single question. "Do you think they expected you to die today?" I looked down at the dark stains spreading beneath my car. "Yes." "Then don't ruin their expectation." That sentence changed everything. An hour later, Nolan arrived at my apartment complex. He photographed the damage from every possible angle: brake lines, fluid leaks, tool marks, everything. Then he arranged for an independent mechanic to inspect the vehicle and document the findings. A proper chain of evidence. No shortcuts, no mistakes. If this eventually reached a courtroom, every detail needed to survive scrutiny. Once the inspection was complete, Nolan outlined a plan. A dangerous one, but effective. If my family believed I survived, they'd immediately begin covering their tracks, deleting records, destroying evidence, coordinating stories. But if they believed I was gone, they would relax. And people make mistakes when they relax. So we created an illusion. My damaged car was transported to a rural roadway outside Knoxville. The vehicle was positioned off the shoulder near a drainage ditch. The front end was crushed against a concrete barrier. The driver's door left open. No driver found. No body discovered. Just enough damage to look serious. Not enough to trigger immediate suspicion. By mid-morning, local traffic reports were already mentioning the accident. Single vehicle crash. Driver missing. Investigation ongoing. Exactly what we wanted. Meanwhile, I checked into a small motel several miles away using cash and a burner phone. The room smelled like old carpet and stale air. Not glamorous, but safe. For the first time all day, I sat alone and listened to the news report describing an accident that never happened. It felt surreal, like listening to my own obituary. Then Nolan called. "Phase 1 worked." "What happened?" The family heard. I leaned forward. "Tell me." Nolan had parked near the Callahan residence with a camera. Everything he observed was legal, everything documented, and what he witnessed told us more than any confession ever could. Nobody called hospitals, nobody contacted emergency services, nobody started searching, nobody appeared worried. Brenda received the news, made one phone call, then calmly sat at the kitchen table. Victor remained motionless for nearly half an hour. Derek left the house carrying a large trash bag. He drove away, returned 40 minutes later, without it. As Nolan described the scene, a cold feeling settled inside me. Not grief, not shock, confirmation. Normal families panic when a daughter disappears. Normal families search. Normal families hope. Mine behaved like a problem had been solved. Later that afternoon, I accessed records I still legally controlled through Walter's estate management credentials. I wasn't intercepting communications. I was reviewing account activity, timestamps, device logs, authorized information. At 11:47 a.m., Derek sent Brenda a message. 2 words. It's done. 1 minute later, Brenda responded, "Thank God." I read those words 3 times, not because I doubted them, because I wanted to remember exactly how they felt. Cold, casual, almost bored, as if they weren't discussing a human life, as if they were talking about completing an errand. At that moment, something inside me changed. For years, I had tolerated being treated like an outsider, ignored, excluded, dismissed. But this was different. This wasn't rejection. This was elimination. Someone had decided my life was worth less than money, and they had acted on that belief. I sat at the small motel desk and opened my laptop. A new encrypted folder appeared on the screen. I named it Callahan Case. Then I started building it. Every transaction, every photograph, every witness statement, every document, every message. Organized, labeled, time-stamped, backed up. The same way I would document a major cybersecurity breach. Because that's exactly what this was. A breach of trust. A breach of family. A breach of everything Walter had spent his life building. Hours later, another phone call arrived. This time from Margaret Holloway, Walter's attorney. She had heard about the accident, and she was worried. Very worried. What she told me next would reveal that Walter had suspected the truth long before any of us realized, and that he had left behind something none of us expected. A sealed letter. One that could only be opened if I personally attended the will reading. Margaret Holloway had known my grandfather for more than 3 decades. She wasn't just his attorney. She was one of the few people Walter trusted completely. When Nolan connected us through a secure conference call, her relief was obvious. "Grace, thank goodness. Are you safe?" "I'm safe," I replied, "but I need answers." There was a brief pause. Then Margaret said something that immediately got my attention. 2 months before Walter passed away, he came to my office and changed several estate documents. I sat upright. "What kind of changes?" "The most important one involved the executor." My pulse quickened. Originally, Victor had been named executor of Walter's estate. That responsibility gave him control over assets, records, and estate decisions. But Walter had changed it, completely. "He removed Victor," Margaret said, "and named you instead." For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Walter knew something was wrong. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to stop trusting his own son, enough to place that responsibility in my hands. Margaret continued. "There was another instruction." "What instruction?" "He left behind a sealed letter." I frowned. "A letter?" "Yes. A personal letter. Only to be opened if you're physically present at the reading." That caught me off guard. "What happens if I'm not there?" "It remains sealed and goes into permanent storage." The room suddenly felt very quiet. Walter had anticipated something. Maybe not an attempt on my life specifically, but he clearly expected obstacles. He wanted me there. Personally. No exceptions. No substitutes. No excuses. I asked Margaret if she knew what was inside. She didn't. Walter had sealed it himself. No copies. No witnesses. No disclosures. Just instructions. And suddenly I understood why attending the will reading mattered so much. Not because of inheritance, because Walter was trying to tell me something. After the call ended, I returned to the financial records. This time I dug deeper, much deeper. The account registered to B. Parker became the center of my investigation. Hours of tracing transfers eventually revealed where the money had gone, and the answers were worse than I expected. Approximately $14,000 had been funneled into Callahan Motors, Victor's struggling dealership, a business that had been losing money for years. Another $48,000 had gone toward credit card balances connected to Derek, restaurant bills, electronics purchases, personal debt, failed business ventures. The final amount shocked me most. Nearly $60,000 had been used as a down payment on a vacation property, and the title wasn't in Victor's name, or Derek's. It belonged exclusively to Brenda. I stared at the documents. The entire picture was becoming clear. Walter's money hadn't disappeared. It had been redistributed to support the people stealing from him. I built timelines, charts, evidence summaries, everything linked together perfectly. 3 years, 78 transactions, nearly $250,000, all flowing toward the same family members. And still, I wasn't finished. Later that afternoon, Nolan called again. His voice sounded different, more serious. "What happened?" I asked. "We got security footage." That immediately got my attention. From the apartment complex entrance camera, the footage clearly showed Derek's black pickup entering the property shortly before 2 in the morning, then leaving roughly 35 minutes later. The exact time frame Frank described. The exact time frame needed to cut brake lines. The evidence was becoming overwhelming, but Nolan wasn't finished. There's more. He had visited a local auto parts store. Using legitimate investigative procedures, he confirmed that Derek had purchased a brake line cutting tool 2 days before the sabotage, and he hadn't used cash. He used his own card. I closed my eyes. Derek wasn't careful. He wasn't strategic. He never had been. He acted first, thought later. And now there was a paper trail, a very expensive paper trail. "The mechanic finished his report too," Nolan added. "Both brake lines were intentionally severed. No wear, no corrosion, no accidental damage, just clean cuts, made by a sharp tool, exactly as we'd suspected." The evidence now connected Derek directly to the attack. But one question still bothered me. Derek wasn't smart enough to plan something this elaborate alone. Someone had pushed him. Someone had convinced him. Someone had given instructions, and I already knew who. Brenda. The problem was proving it. Suspicion wasn't enough. I needed evidence, real evidence, something undeniable, something capable of collapsing the entire house of cards in one blow. That evening I contacted Detective Clara Simmons. We had worked together on a corporate fraud investigation years earlier. She knew how I documented cases. She knew I didn't make accusations without evidence. After reviewing the files, she was silent for a long time. Then she finally spoke. "Grace, this is serious." "I know." "No, you don't understand." Her tone hardened. "The financial records alone support felony elder exploitation charges." My stomach tightened. "And the brake evidence?" "Potential attempted murder." The words landed like concrete. Attempted murder. Not sabotage, not vandalism, not reckless conduct. Attempted murder. Clara continued reviewing documents while we talked. When she finally finished, her conclusion was simple. "We can get warrants." I stared at the motel wall. Warrants. Real arrests. Real consequences. Years of lies were finally reaching their end. But I wasn't ready yet. Because I wanted something more. I wanted the truth exposed in front of everyone. In the same room. At the same time. The will reading was only 48 hours away. And by the time it ended, every secret the Callahan family had hidden would finally be exposed. After ending the call with Detective Clara Simmons, I sat alone in the motel room staring at the evidence spread across my laptop screen. The case was already strong. Too strong. The financial records connected Brenda to the missing money. The security footage connected Derek to my apartment complex. The purchase receipt connected him to the tool used on my brake lines. The mechanic's report confirmed sabotage, and Clara was confident enough to obtain warrants. Yet something still bothered me. I felt like Walter had left behind another piece of the puzzle. Something important. The next morning, Nolan arrived carrying a plain white envelope. "My stop at your P.O. box paid off," he said. I immediately recognized the handwriting. Walter's. The envelope had been mailed only days before his death. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photocopy of a banking document. Attached was a yellow sticky note. Walter's handwriting looked shaky but readable. February 14th, $47,000. Ask Brenda who approved it. I stared at the withdrawal slip beneath the note. Walter's signature appeared at the bottom. At least it was supposed to. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. I had seen Walter's signature thousands of times, on legal documents, birthday cards, checks, power of attorney forms. This wasn't his handwriting. It was close. Dangerously close, but not identical. The letter W was narrower. The C was tighter. The spacing was different. A forgery. A good one. But still a forgery. Then I noticed another handwritten message beneath the sticky note. Only 4 words. I didn't sign this. A chill ran through me. Walter knew. Even before he died. He knew someone was forging his name, and he had intentionally left breadcrumbs behind for me to find. I immediately scanned the document and forwarded copies to Margaret and Detective Simmons. Then I returned to Walter's cloud archive. If one document was forged, there could be more. Hours later, I found exactly what I feared. A loan agreement, 14 months old. Value, $34,000. Borrower, Callahan Motors. Collateral, Walter's home. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Walter's house. The house he'd lived in for decades. The house where he taught me how to change oil. The house where he spent his final years. It had been pledged as collateral, without his knowledge, without his consent. And once again, the authorization form contained the same forged signature, same narrow W, same cramped C. Victor hadn't simply ignored Brenda's theft. He had committed his own fraud. His failing dealership had been drowning in debt. Instead of fixing the business, he'd secretly used his father's property as security. I leaned back in my chair. The situation was even worse than I imagined. Brenda stole money. Victor forged documents. Derek cut brake lines. 3 separate crimes. 3 separate people. 1 family. 1 conspiracy. The deeper I dug, the clearer the motive became. They weren't trying to protect an inheritance. They were trying to protect years of fraud. And if I attended the will reading, everything risked being exposed, which explained why someone wanted me dead before I could get there. By late afternoon, my evidence package had doubled in size. Every transaction, every forged document, every witness statement, every photograph, everything organized into a professional report. Then Nolan called again. His voice sounded almost impressed. Found something else. What now? The apartment security footage is crystal clear. My heart skipped. And? We can identify Derek without question. That alone was huge. But Nolan wasn't finished. The timestamp matches the AutoZone purchase timeline perfectly. The chain of evidence was becoming airtight. For the first time since Walter's death, I felt something close to certainty. Not confidence, certainty. The truth was about to come out. And in less than 24 hours, the entire Callahan family would walk into a room believing they still controlled the story. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The night before the rescheduled will reading, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid, because everything was finally in motion. The evidence was complete. The warrants were prepared. And for the first time since Walter's death, I knew exactly what would happen next. Around 7 the following morning, I sat at the motel desk reviewing the final report. Every section was organized with precision. Financial theft, forgery, attempted murder, supporting evidence, witness statements. Nothing was missing. Nothing was left to chance. A few minutes later, Nolan arrived. He handed me a fresh copy of the evidence binder. "Ready?" he asked. I looked at the thick folder. Months of crimes, years of betrayal, all condensed into a few hundred pages. As ready as I'll ever be. We drove downtown together. The city looked normal. People walked to work. Traffic lights changed. Coffee shops opened. Meanwhile, 3 members of my family were about to watch their entire world collapse. The contrast felt surreal. By 9:40 a.m., we pulled into the parking lot outside Margaret Holloway's office. The building was old brick, professional, quiet. Nothing about it suggested history would be made there that morning. 3 vehicles were already parked outside. Brenda's SUV, Victor's sedan, Derek's pickup. Seeing that truck again made my stomach tighten. For a moment, I imagined what would have happened if Frank hadn't warned me. A downhill road, failed brakes, a collision, a funeral. Exactly what they expected. But that wasn't the story anymore. Now I was the one holding the truth. Nolan checked his phone. Clara's team is in position. I nodded. 2 unmarked police vehicles waited nearby, out of sight, ready. All they needed was my signal. Frank remained downstairs in the lobby. He insisted on coming. Not for revenge, not for justice, for Walter. That simple loyalty meant more to me than he probably realized. I stepped out of the car and adjusted my blazer. Inside the pocket rested Walter's silver watch. Tick, tick, tick. Steady as ever. I touched it briefly before walking toward the entrance. Each step felt strangely calm. Months ago, I might have been nervous. Now I felt focused. The fear had already burned away. At the top of the staircase stood the conference room. Through the glass panel, I could see them. Brenda sat scrolling through her phone. Victor stared at the table. Derek bounced his leg nervously. Margaret waited quietly at the head of the room. None of them knew I was watching. None of them knew I was alive. I took a deep breath, then opened the door. The reaction was immediate. Brenda looked up first. Her phone slipped from her hand. Victor's coffee cup tipped over. Derek froze, completely froze. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The silence felt enormous. I walked inside, closed the door, and took my seat. "Good morning," I said calmly. No one answered. Because ghosts aren't supposed to walk into rooms. Not when you believe they're already dead. Margaret adjusted her glasses. Her expression remained perfectly professional. "Shall we begin?" I nodded. The will reading started. Walter's estate was summarized. The house, savings, insurance, remaining assets, everything. Then came the distribution. Equal shares, 3 beneficiaries, Victor, Derek, and me. Each receiving approximately the same inheritance. The room changed instantly. Relief spread across their faces. Real relief. They had expected something different. They expected Walter to leave everything to me. Instead, he divided it equally. The realization hit them all at once. They had tried to eliminate me over money they were already receiving. I watched Brenda carefully. Her shoulders relaxed. Victor exhaled. Derek leaned back in his chair. For the first time all morning, they looked hopeful. That hope lasted less than 60 seconds. Because Margaret reached for a second envelope. A sealed envelope. Walter's final letter. The one that could only be opened if I was present. Brenda's relief vanished. I saw it happen in real time. Something deep inside her recognized danger. Margaret broke the seal, opened the letter, and began to read. The first few lines were simple. Walter talking about honesty, hard work, family. Then the tone changed. "I watched money disappear for years," Margaret read aloud. The room went still. Walter's words continued. "I kept waiting for someone to tell me the truth." Brenda's face drained of color. Victor stared downward. Derek looked confused. And then came the sentence that changed everything. "I was wrong about some people." Margaret paused, then continued. "But I was right about Grace." I felt the watch ticking against my chest. Walter knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to trust me. Enough to leave me the responsibility of finishing what he could not. When Margaret finished reading, silence filled the room. I slowly opened the evidence binder, placed it in the center of the table, and looked directly at Brenda. Grandpa was right. Then I pushed the first document toward her, the financial records, the beginning of the end. Brenda stared at the financial records as if they were written in another language. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, and Walter's pocket watch inside my blazer. I slid the first page toward the center of the table. 78 unauthorized transactions. My voice remained calm, professional, measured. The money was transferred from Walter's accounts over a period of 3 years. Brenda immediately shook her head. That's not true. I ignored the interruption. Total amount taken, $247,000. Victor closed his eyes. Derek looked back and forth between us, confused, panicked, trying to understand how quickly everything was unraveling. I flipped to the next section. Every transfer led to the same destination account. Then I pointed to the registration documents. An account opened under the name B. Parker. Brenda's jaw tightened. She knew exactly what was coming. Your maiden name? Silence. The room seemed to shrink. Margaret watched quietly, like a judge observing testimony. I continued. From that account, the money was distributed to multiple locations. I placed another document on the table. $140,000 went to Callahan Motors. Victor lowered his head. Another page. $48,000 paid Derek's personal debts. Derek blinked. What? Then the final document. Nearly $60,000 funded the purchase of a vacation property titled solely in Brenda's name. The color drained from her face. That property was mine. No, I replied. It was Walter's money. For the first time, Brenda lost control. She shoved her chair backward and stood. You have no right to go through private accounts. I looked directly at her. I'm the executor of Walter's estate. Then I tapped the binder. And these are estate records. Brenda's hands trembled. Not from fear, from anger. The kind of anger people feel when their secrets stop being secrets. Victor finally spoke. Quietly, almost helplessly. Brenda. She spun toward him. Don't. One word. Sharp enough to cut glass, but the damage was already done. I reached into the folder and removed another document, the forged withdrawal slip. I placed it beside an authentic sample of Walter's signature, side by side, impossible to ignore. This withdrawal removed $47,000. I pointed at the signature. And Walter didn't sign it. Nobody said anything. I pointed again. The handwriting doesn't match. Then another page. The loan agreement. $340,000. Collateralized against Walter's home. Victor immediately recognized it. His expression collapsed. He knew, because he had signed it. Or rather, he had forged it. I looked directly at him. You used your father's home to secure business debt. Victor swallowed hard. His hands were visibly shaking now. I was going to fix it. The words sounded pathetic even to him. You forged legal documents. I was desperate. You were stealing. Silence. Victor couldn't argue, because both statements were true. Then Derek suddenly leaned forward. I didn't take any money. His voice cracked. I wasn't involved in that. I nodded slowly. You're right. For a moment, relief appeared on his face. Then I opened the final section of the report. Attempted murder. The relief vanished. I laid the AutoZone receipt on the table. Then the security photos. Then the mechanic's sworn statement. Each document landed like a hammer. Derek Callahan purchased a brake line cutting tool 2 days before the attack. His face turned pale. I slid the surveillance photos forward. Your truck entered my apartment complex at 1:47 a.m. Another page. It left at 2:23 a.m. Then the mechanic's report. Both brake lines were intentionally severed. Derek stared at the documents. His breathing became shallow, fast, unsteady. The room felt suffocating. He looked toward Brenda, instinctively, like a child looking for instructions. And that was the mistake, because everyone saw it, including me, including Margaret, including Victor, including Brenda herself. Then Derek blurted out the words that destroyed everything. Mom said there weren't any cameras. The room froze. Absolute silence. Brenda's eyes widened. Too late. Far too late. The confession was out. Nobody could pull it back. Nobody could pretend it hadn't happened. Victor stared at his wife. Derek stared at the floor. And for the first time all morning, Brenda looked genuinely afraid. Not angry, not defensive, afraid. Because she realized something important. The story was over, and the police were already waiting outside. Brenda's face went white. For the first time since I had walked into the room, she looked completely exposed. Not angry, not confident, not in control. Exposed. The realization hit her all at once. Years of manipulation, years of lies, years of treating everyone around her like pieces on a chessboard. And now one careless sentence had destroyed everything. Mom said there weren't any cameras. Derek sat frozen after saying it. His eyes widened as he understood what he'd done. The room remained silent. Nobody rushed to save him. Nobody could. Because the truth had already landed. Brenda slowly turned toward her son. "You idiot." The words came out barely above a whisper. Derek looked down at the table, like a child waiting to be scolded. Victor closed his eyes. I think that was the moment he finally accepted reality. Not when he saw the financial records, not when he saw the forged documents, but when he watched his own son accidentally expose the entire conspiracy. The family he had spent decades protecting was collapsing in front of him, and there was nothing left to hold together. I calmly closed one section of the binder and opened another. Then I placed several photographs in the center of the table. Pictures of my damaged brake lines, close-up images, clear images, undeniable images. The cuts were clean, precise, intentional. The photographs spoke for themselves. These were taken the morning of the will reading. Nobody responded. I slid forward the mechanic's sworn report, then the AutoZone receipt, then the security camera screenshots. A complete chain of evidence, every piece connected, every piece documented, every piece real. Brenda suddenly slammed her hand against the table. "This is ridiculous!" The outburst echoed through the conference room. "You have no proof I told him to do anything." I looked at her calmly. "Actually, I do." For the first time, uncertainty appeared in her eyes. I pulled out another page. A record of the messages exchanged after news of my supposed accident spread. Derek's message. "It's done." Brenda's response. "Thank God." Nobody said a word. Brenda stared at the page. Victor stared at Brenda. Margaret stared at the table. The evidence seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. Victor finally spoke. His voice sounded tired, older than I had ever heard it. "You knew she was dead." Nobody answered. He looked directly at Brenda. "You thought Grace was dead." Still silence. Then Victor laughed. A short, broken laugh. Not because anything was funny, because sometimes people laugh when reality becomes too painful. "You never even called a hospital." Brenda looked away. Victor shook his head. Slowly. Disappointed. Defeated. "I spent 30 years defending you." His voice cracked. "And this is what you've become." Brenda's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't act innocent." Victor looked at her, then at the documents, then at me. "I know I'm not innocent." The room went quiet again, because it was the first honest thing anyone had said all morning. Victor rubbed his face with both hands. "I knew about the money." Brenda immediately turned toward him. "What are you doing?" He ignored her. "I knew about the transfers." My chest tightened. Finally, the truth. "I told myself we'd replace it." Victor stared at the table. "I told myself the dealership would recover." His shoulders slumped. But it never did. Every word sounded heavier than the last. Margaret quietly took notes. Victor continued. "I signed things I shouldn't have signed." Then he looked at me. Directly. For the first time in years. "I'm sorry." I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not anger, nothing. Because apologies don't undo choices. They don't restore trust. And they certainly don't bring back the years Walter spent being robbed by the people he loved most. Brenda looked horrified. Not because Victor confessed, because he stopped protecting her. For decades, she had controlled every situation, every conversation, every family decision. Now that control was gone, completely gone. I slowly closed the binder, then reached into my blazer. The silver pocket watch appeared in my hand. Walter's watch. I placed it gently on the table. Tick, tick, tick. The sound seemed louder than before, almost symbolic, a reminder of the man who had trusted me when nobody else did. I looked at Brenda, then Victor, then Derek. The inheritance was equal. My voice was calm, steady. You were all getting the same share. Nobody spoke. You tried to destroy me for money that was already yours. The words hit harder than any accusation, because they were true. 100% true, and nobody in that room could deny it. Then I picked up my phone, opened a message, typed a single word, now, and pressed send. For a moment, nothing happened. Then footsteps echoed from the stairwell outside. Heavy footsteps. Multiple people. Coming closer. The sound grew louder. Closer. Closer. Until the conference room door began to open, and everything changed. The conference room door swung open. 3 people stepped inside, 2 uniformed officers, and Detective Clara Simmons. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. What had started as a will reading was no longer a family meeting. It was now a criminal investigation. Clara carried a folder in one hand. Her expression was professional, calm, unemotional, the kind of expression people wear when facts have already been established and the only thing left is procedure. Brenda looked from Clara to me, then back again, and finally understood. The police hadn't arrived by accident. They were there because I had invited them, because everything was already over. Clara stopped beside the table. She opened the folder. Derek Callahan. Derek froze. You are under arrest for attempted murder. The words hit him like a freight train. His face lost all color. What? An officer stepped forward. Derek looked toward Brenda, then Victor, then me, desperately searching for someone to rescue him. Nobody did, because there was nobody left. Every lie had collapsed. Every excuse had failed. Every secret had surfaced. The officer repeated the instruction. Derek slowly stood. His knees looked weak. His hands trembled as they were placed behind his back. The handcuffs clicked shut. A sharp metallic sound. Final. Permanent. Real. Then Clara turned her attention toward Brenda. Brenda Callahan. Brenda lifted her chin, still trying to maintain control, still trying to project strength, but fear had already taken over. You are under arrest for conspiracy and elder financial exploitation. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked small, not physically, emotionally, like someone realizing power had finally run out. The officer approached. Brenda's eyes locked onto mine. Pure hatred, pure rage. You'll regret this. The room became silent. I looked back at her, calmly. No, one word, nothing more, because there was nothing left to say. The woman who had spent 25 years telling me I wasn't family had finally lost everything. Not because of revenge, because of her own choices. The cuffs closed around her wrists, and just like that, the illusion ended. As officers escorted her toward the door, she glanced into the lobby, then suddenly stopped. Frank was standing there, Walter's old jacket hanging from his shoulders. Brenda immediately recognized him. The homeless man. Her voice shook. You ruined everything. Frank looked at her quietly, then shook his head. No, ma'am. His answer was simple. You did. The officers led her away. The sound of footsteps faded down the hallway, then disappeared. The room felt strangely empty afterward. Victor remained seated, motionless, defeated. The man looked 20 years older than he had that morning. Eventually he stood, picked up his coat, and walked toward the door. Halfway there he stopped, not looking at me, not looking at anyone. I should have protected him. His voice was barely audible. Walter deserved better. Then he left. No argument, no defense, no excuses, just regret. The door closed behind him, and for the first time all day, the room became completely quiet. Margaret sat across from me. Nolan stood near the window. Frank remained outside. Only a handful of people were left, the people who had actually cared. Margaret reached into a drawer, then slid a final envelope across the table. Walter's personal letter, the one he had specifically instructed them to give me. Only me. My hands were steady as I opened it. Inside was a single page. Walter's handwriting filled every line. I read silently, and almost immediately felt my eyes sting. The letter wasn't about money, or property, or inheritance. It was about trust. Walter wrote that he knew something was wrong. Not every detail, but enough. Enough to understand who could be trusted. Enough to know who would do the right thing. He ended the letter with a sentence I will never forget. Family isn't who claims you. Family is who stands beside you when it costs them something. I folded the letter carefully, then slipped it beside the silver watch. 2 things from Walter. One still ticking, one forever silent. Both priceless. Over the following months, the legal process moved forward. Brenda faced criminal charges. Derek faced trial. Victor cooperated with investigators and lost his inheritance rights. The stolen money was recovered. The vacation property was sold. The fraudulent loan was canceled. Walter's house was protected. Justice wasn't fast, but it came. Eventually. As for me, I kept the house. Not because I wanted an inheritance, because I wanted to preserve the one place where Walter had always made me feel like I belonged. I converted part of the property into a cybersecurity consulting office. Frank became my first employee. Nolan sent referrals. Business grew. Life moved forward. One morning, months later, I sat at Walter's kitchen table with a cup of coffee beside my laptop. Sunlight streamed through the window. Frank worked outside repairing a fence. The pocket watch rested beside my keyboard. Tick, tick, tick. The same steady rhythm, the same reminder. I picked it up and wound it exactly the way Walter taught me. 40 turns. No more, no less. Then I smiled. Because for the first time in a very long time, the house felt peaceful. The lies were gone. The fear was gone. The betrayal was gone. Only truth remained. A few days later, I visited Walter's grave. No flowers. He never cared much about flowers. Instead, I brought an old wrench from his garage, the first tool he ever owned. I placed it gently against the headstone, then stood there quietly. The morning air was cool. The cemetery was silent. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt completely at peace. We got them, Grandpa. The words came out softly, but they were enough. I stayed for another minute, then turned and walked away. The watch ticked inside my pocket, steady, strong, unstoppable. Just like the lesson Walter spent his life teaching me. The people who truly love you will build you up. The people who only pretend will tear you down the moment it benefits them. And eventually, the truth reveals which is which. If this story reminded you that real family isn't defined by blood but by loyalty, let us know in the comments with the word trust. Have you ever discovered someone's true character when money was involved? Share your thoughts below. We read every comment. And if you enjoy powerful stories about family secrets, betrayal, justice, and unexpected heroes, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Your support helps us bring you more unforgettable real-life drama every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, the people who truly care about you will stand beside you when it costs them something. The rest will reveal themselves when they think nobody is watching. See you in the next story.